House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the president had a, quote, meltdown today during a contentious meeting at the White House. The topic at hand was the president's decision to pull troops from Syria. The bipartisan meeting was held just hours after the House voted to condemn the president's actions in Syria. The president today defended that move and said that America's Kurdish allies are, quote, no angels. He also accused the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, of being a greater terrorist threat than ISIS.
The thing that's common is that everybody hates ISIS. Now, the PKK, which is a part of the Kurds, as you know, is probably worse at terror and more of a terrorist threat in many ways than ISIS. So it's a very semi-complicated, not too complicated if you're smart.
According to House Democratic leadership, President Trump does not have a plan to contain ISIS, other than saying that the Turks and Syrians would guard ISIS prisoners. Here's what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said moments after she walked out of the meeting while it was still in progress.
I think that vote, the size of the vote, more than 2-to-1 of the Republicans voted to oppose what the president did, probably got to the president because he was shaken up by it. And that's why we couldn't continue in the meeting, because he was just not relating to the reality of it.
Go ahead,
what we witnessed on the part of the president was a meltdown. Sad to say.
House Democrats added that the president was insulting to Pelosi in that meeting. Republican Kevin McCarthy acknowledged it was heated, but criticized the Democrats for walking out.
I see a pattern of behavior with Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She storms out of another meeting, trying to make it unproductive. The other Democrats stayed and actually had a very productive meeting. Inside the meeting, what I listened to the speaker refer to the president, I thought was unbecoming. I watched individuals get heated in the process. I've been in a lot of meetings where individuals get heated with one another. I do not believe in that process that you get up and you walk away.
Nancy Cook and Siobhan Hughes join me now. Nancy covers the White House for Politico, and Siobhan covers Congress for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to both of you. Nancy, I'd like to start with you. What more can you tell us about what happened inside that meeting at the White House?
Well, we're still really learning about it. As Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi came out to the microphones after the meeting, and so did Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and they offered very differing views of it. I think that the one conclusion we can draw from it is that it ended up not being incredibly productive. There was not any sort of bipartisan agreement on what to do on Turkey or Syria moving forward. And again, it became sort of a referendum on both the way that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi conducted herself in the meeting, but also the way President Trump potentially conducted himself. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that he was very disrespectful and had this meltdown. Leader McCarthy basically said, she walked out of the meeting. So, even these meetings are so partisan at the White House, and this comes at a tough week for the White House because they're facing all of these questions, even from Republicans on the Hill, about their handling of Syria, and they're also facing the impeachment inquiry.
Well, Siobhan, what are you hearing from members of Congress?
So the members of Congress have only just begun to trickle back to the Capitol. It's a pretty monumental thing to have the president call the Speaker of the House a third-rate politician. Democrats are likely to view this as a sign that they are clearly getting under the president's skin. It's also a sign of just how tense it is in this Capitol right now, pretty much across the board, from the situation in Syria and Turkey to impeachment. Tempers are about as high as they can get.
Siobhan, earlier today, CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez asked Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell whether the president's comments about the Kurds and his actions in Syria lead him to doubt the president's foreign policy judgment. Here's his response.
In this particular instance, I disagree. I don't know how many times I need to say it, and I think I'm speaking for most members of my conference that this was a mistake, and I hope it can be repaired.
But does it cause you to have broader concerns?
I have concerns about this particular decision. I think it was a mistake. I hope it can be repaired.
So, Siobhan, with that response in mind, do you think it's likely that McConnell will allow a vote on a resolution similar to the one the House passed today?
he gave no indication that he intended to allow a vote on that sort of resolution, nor did he indicate he would allow a vote on some type of sanctions package aimed at Turkey. So at the moment, this is a case where Mr. McConnell's rhetoric is running far ahead of the substance of what he is prepared to do.
And Siobhan, what impact would passing that resolution have?
So the resolution is really a matter of rhetoric. In substance, it does nothing. It calls on Turkey to withdraw. It formally disapproves of the president's actions there, leaving the Kurds defenseless. But as a practical matter, it does nothing except sound as a rebuke to President Trump. And that's why a lot of people are focusing more on the sanctions legislation that could be in the works.
So I'm just being handed this letter. CBS News has also obtained a letter that President Trump sent to the Turkish president on October 9th, saying, quote, "You don't want to be responsible for slaughtering thousands of people. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool." It starts off by saying, "Dear Mr. President, let's work out a good deal." And it ends, "I will call you later. Sincerely, Donald Trump." Nancy, what should we take away from this letter? Does this suggest that President Erdogan did not take President Trump's views seriously?
Well, President Trump, I was at the White House earlier today for a joint press conference between President Trump and the leader of Italy, and he referenced this letter and talked about how he might release it, just to show that he, was trying to stand up to the president of Turkey and was trying to condemn any sort of violence towards the Kurds. And so the White House ended up releasing the letter. Politico has also confirmed that it is President Trump did actually write it. And I think that he is trying to show that, he is, in the letter, he's trying to stand up to Erdogan and say, hey, look, if you do take any violent action towards the Kurds or others, or there's violence in Syria or bombing, I will impose the sanctions. I think it's the White House doing a little CYA on given all the backlash about what has happened in Turkey this week and Syria.
And Nancy, Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are heading to Turkey tonight to meet with the country's president. What are they hoping to accomplish?
Well, I think that part of what they're hoping to accomplish is to come back potentially with some sort of promise that, that Turkey will not, retaliate against the Kurds, or there won't be more violence in Syria. But the fact of the matter is that violence has already started. And so I think that a lot of what they're doing is trying to clean up the public relations mess that the White House has found itself in since it basically withdrew troops from Syria. And you saw during this press conference earlier today, the president was really trying to get at that. He said that there were really only 28 U.S. troops in Syria that they withdrew. There was very few. None of them were harmed. He tried to fall back on the idea that he had promised during the 2016 campaign to end the idea of endless wars, and that he had always wanted to pull troops out of there. And so this is really the White House trying to scramble and communicate this decision effectively to the American public, when I think the decision, in fact, was pretty hastily made. And sending Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo to Turkey, a week and a half afterwards, is them, I think, trying to contain some of the fallout from this.
As you've been speaking, I'm looking at a little bit more of this letter here. It is fascinating to read the way in which President Trump appealed, apparently, or tried to appeal to President Erdogan. I'm going to just read a little bit more of this. This is President Trump writing to President Erdogan. "I have worked hard to solve some of your problems. Don't let the world down. You can make a great deal." The last graph here: "History will look upon you favorably if you get this done the right and humane way. It will look upon you forever as the devil if good things don't happen. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool. I will call you later. Sincerely, Donald Trump." Nancy, what's the reality of the leverage that the United States of America now has in this situation with Turkey?
Well, the U.S. really doesn't have leverage. And I think that what is frightening to a lot of foreign policy experts is how little leverage we have, and then the fact that there are still U.S. nuclear weapons inside Turkey, which gives us even less leverage. And so I think that, The U.S. has basically pulled out of Syria, pulled its troops out of that border. We have nuclear weapons there. I think the president is trying to appeal to Erdogan, but we just don't have a lot of leverage left. And there was really no plan B as to how to deal with this if it didn't go well.
I want to turn to impeachment now. Siobhan, we had a pair of current and former State Department officials testifying before House committees today. Do we know what they told the committees?
So all of this was behind closed doors, but one thing we do know is that Michael McKinley, who was a former advisor to Secretary of State Mike Pence, explained why he resigned. He said it turned in large part on asking Mr. Pompeo to support the former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and that Mr. Pompeo responded with silence. And it was at that point, Mr. McKinley said, that he made the decision he had to leave. Mr. Volker also was back on the Hill. He was not there to testify, though. The former special envoy to Ukraine had come to review his deposition, the words that he had provided behind closed doors to the committees when the impeachment hearings first began. There is some expectation that his transcript could be released soon, and so it's possible that he wanted to go over what he had said to make sure he was comfortable with it or felt it was accurate and reflected his words.
Well, Nancy, Rudy Giuliani, Vice President Pence, the Pentagon, and the Office of Management and Budget are all refusing to comply with congressional subpoenas. Why has the White House been unable to prevent State Department employees from testifying?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's a huge frustration on the part of the White House. White House officials that I talked to this week really thought that letter that they sent to the Hill last week from the White House top attorney, making clear that the White House was not going to cooperate at all. I think they were hoping that would just apply to all documents, all witnesses. But what they've actually found in the ensuing days is that actually there are people at agencies, particularly the State Department, that they are unable to stop from testifying, either people who have gotten subpoenas, who have decided to cooperate, or people who have left the State Department. And the White House hasn't been able to sort of convince them through aggressive language that they used in that letter that they shouldn't testify. And I think that shows that there are a lot of tentacles to this investigation and a lot of different ways for Democrats to get information, not just from people who work in the West Wing.
And Siobhan, we've also seen congressional Republicans step up their defense of President Trump during this impeachment inquiry. Our Nancy Court has also asked House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy if the president's conduct with Ukraine was proper. Let's play that clip.
I hear all of you attacking the impeachment process, but none of you defending the president's actions. Do any of you think it was okay for the president to ask more than one foreign nation to investigate his campaign rival?
The president wasn't investigating a campaign rival. What the president was trying to get to the bottom, just as every American would want to know. Why did we go through 2 years? Why did we have this Russia hoax that actually started within Ukraine? This is an open case that the Attorney General is investigating. The president simply said, would you work with the Attorney General? Every single day in America, we work with other countries to solve open cases. There's nothing that the president did wrong. There's nothing that the president did within that call that's impeachable. And you know what? If the Speaker would have waited 48 hours to have the transcript, we wouldn't putting America through this.
So, Siobhan, help us understand what McCarthy is arguing there.
So his answer was extremely interesting because Republicans have so far mostly criticized Democrats over the process, over the fact that this is largely behind closed doors. What Kevin McCarthy did was pivot to the substance, and he seems to be saying that Donald Trump did absolutely nothing wrong when he asked Ukrainian President Zelensky to begin an investigation that could end up helping Donald Trump. Kevin McCarthy's argument is that it makes sense for a president to want to get to the bottom of any type of wrongdoing or shenanigans that may have impinged upon what happened to this country in 2016. There is a theory out there that is being perpetuated on the conservative wing that says there is a DNC server that is stuck in Ukraine, and somehow if everybody knew about the server. They would understand Russians hadn't meddled in the election. In fact, it was some other entity. Now, that is, I have not seen any basis for that claim at all. It was apparently perpetuated by some Ukrainian prosecutors, but nonetheless, Kevin McCarthy is saying maybe there's some there, and you should look into it.
Interesting. We'll continue to watch how that develops. Nancy Cook and Siobhan Hughes, thanks to you both for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.